A streak of fire cuts across the sky, then seconds later a devastating impact. A US-owned cargo ship shudders as a missile tears into its hull. Alarms blare, crews scramble, and the US Navy is nowhere to be seen. And this wasn't an attack from China. It wasn't from Russia either. It was a rebel force buried deep in Yemen that has somehow managed to drag the US Navy into its longest sea battle since World War II. On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we'll show you how the Houthi rebels are taking on the US Navy and surviving. You probably know all about one side of this conflict, the US Navy. It is the biggest, baddest fleet to ever sail the seas, with over 4.5 million tons of sheer power. 11 aircraft carriers are already in service, with more on the way. There are 300 combat-ready vessels and over 4,000 operational aircraft in the skies. With over 667,000 active-duty personnel and another 100,000 in reserve, it's a force built for global dominance, and it's been around for nearly 250 years, and it is still the gold standard of naval warfare. When the US Navy shows up, it's usually game over. Usually, but not this time, because this time the US Navy isn't up against a traditional navy or a rival superpower. No fleets, no fighter squadrons, just a rebel group born in the mountains of northern Yemen, armed with old grievances, new weapons, and a whole lot of audacity. Meet the Houthis. They call themselves Ansar Allah, supporters of God, but most know them by the name of their founding tribe. They're Zaydi Shia Muslims from Yemen's Sa'ada province, a group that once ruled Yemen for 1,000 years. That is, until it was overthrown in 1962, and its power disappeared. But by the 1980s, the group had had enough. What began as a cultural revival turned into a political movement, and by the 2000s, that movement had guns. Fast forward to 2014, and the Houthis toppled Yemen's government and took control of the capital. Today, they don't just hold a few pockets of land in the country, they control 2/3 of Yemen's population and around 1/3 of the country's land. This includes key areas like the Red Sea coastline. However, these gains certainly came at a cost. More than 150,000 people have died, and the violence has forced 4.8 million people from their homes. It's estimated that 19.5 million Yemenis, more than half the country, are now in dire need of aid. Amid all this destruction, the Houthis run a de facto government, one that collects taxes and even prints its own money. So while the Houthis may be the underdogs in the global sense, their grip on Yemen is anything but weak. They've allegedly got up to 200,000 fighters, a brutal ideology, and a rallying cry that tells you everything you need to know. God is great, death to America, death to Israel, a curse upon the Jews, victory to Islam. So why is it that the Houthis are fighting the US? To make good on that death to America part? Well, not exactly. The roots of the current conflict actually do have to do with the other country getting an unfortunate shout-out in the Houthis' rallying cry: Israel. You see, when the Israel-Hamas war erupted in October 2023, the Houthis wasted no time getting involved. In a bid to show support for Hamas and Palestinians, the Houthis started launching missiles and drones at Israel-linked targets, as well as US-operated ships in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. By December 2024, the Houthis had attacked more than 60 ships. And these attacks weren't just an inconvenience. They sunk 2 vessels, hijacked a 3rd, and even killed 4 crew members. All of a sudden, the Red Sea, a critical shipping route, was under siege. But why the Red Sea? Well, Yemen's nearly 1,200 miles of coastline sits right along one of the world's most important waterways. Each year, trillions of dollars worth of global trade passes through the Red Sea and into the Suez Canal. And that is why when the Houthis began attacking commercial ships, it wasn't just a local issue, it disrupted the entire global economy. Commercial shipping activity in the Red Sea had dropped nearly 60%, a region that usually handles around 15% of global trade and 30% of global container traffic. Rates for container shipping between Europe and Asia jumped by as much as 173%, with the DRI World Container Index reporting a 115% increase on average. And that is why the US got involved. You can't have someone so brazenly jeopardizing global trade and threatening freedom of navigation without the world's strongest military stepping in to set things straight. But despite the sheer force and power, the US Navy quickly realized that the Houthis weren't their usual adversary. Instead of being wiped out in a few decisive strikes, the Houthis survived, and they have done it with relentless determination. On the 9th of January 2024, US ships including the USS Laboon had to shoot down 18 drones, 2 anti-ship missiles, and a ballistic missile, and that is just in one day. And this has been happening day after day for nearly 20 months, and that's with the US pouring millions into stopping them. Just 3 weeks of Operation Rough Rider, a large-scale campaign against the group launched in March 2025, cost the U.S. $200 million. If the strikes continue at the same intensity, this figure could balloon to a jaw-dropping $1 billion. And yet, despite all of that firepower, the Houthis have refused to be wiped out. So let's take a closer look at how the Houthis have been targeting the U.S. Navy and, against all odds, getting away with it. First up, missiles. Ballistic, cruise, and everything in between. These aren't your typical backyard rockets. They are high-speed, high-tech projectiles that can cause untold destruction. The Houthis have managed to turn these missiles into an art form, attacking U.S. naval vessels and commercial ships with alarming frequency, and not without success. Truthfully, the U.S. Navy has had to deal with more than just a few close calls. But where are these missiles coming from? After all, we aren't talking about a country with a massive defense budget or a sprawling arms industry. The U.S. is the one with the $849.8 billion defense budget, with $28.4 billion going to missile defense capabilities. The entirety of Yemen doesn't spend that much on defense, and the Houthis are just a part of that war-torn country, not even the whole show. Well, it's simple, really. The Houthis are financed by another country, one whose military budget is 200% higher than the year before, Iran. Iran has played a pivotal role in empowering the Houthis to resist and counter the might of the U.S. and its allies. It was Iran's weapons transfers, training, and strategic advice that allowed the group to grow its military capabilities exponentially. Just look at the naval front. In 2015, the Houthis, with Iran's help, began developing anti-ship capabilities. Iran sent anti-ship missiles and helped the Houthis set up truck-based missile launchers, which could be hidden after firing. The country also provided intelligence through ships like the MV Savis, an Iranian vessel stationed off the coast of Eritrea. This made it possible for the Houthis to successfully target and damage enemy vessels and accurately fire at U.S. targets. And we aren't just talking about the attacks in the 2020s. The Houthis began launching missiles at the U.S. Navy destroyers and amphibious transport docks as soon as they gained control of their coastal areas, sometime around 2016. While these strikes didn't all result in direct hits, the growing frequency and sophistication of the missile launches posed a significant challenge. And this challenge only continued to grow. In 2024, the Houthis unveiled the Palestine II missile, which they claimed to have locally manufactured, though analysts say it closely resembles Iranian designs. With a range of over 1,200 miles, it can reach targets as far as Israel. This clearly shows how Iran's support has allowed the Houthis to project power well beyond Yemen's borders. But the Palestine II is far from the only missile the Houthis use in their daily attacks. It's also not the only one that's supposedly locally made in Yemen, yet Iran somehow has its fingerprints all over the weapon. Take the Asef ballistic missile, for instance. The missile is a direct derivative of Iran's Fateh 313, and it has a reach of 280 miles. That's a serious range to close in on a target, and it's been used in multiple strikes. Then there's the Tankil ballistic missile, an anti-ship version of the Iranian Rad 500 missile. This one has a longer range of 310 miles, so if ships thought that they were safe out there in the Red Sea or the Gulf of Aden, think again. This missile brings the fight to the U.S. Navy's doorstep. And let's not forget the smaller missiles in their arsenal, like the Falak, which have far less reach but are still enough to ruin your day if they hit the right spot. The Falak's range is about 87 miles, but that doesn't make it any less dangerous. If we look at the Houthis' arsenal of cruise missiles, things get even more interesting. The group possesses all kinds of cruise missiles: radar homing, infrared guided, and electro-optical. Their operational ranges go from 25 miles all the way up to 500 miles and then some. It's no wonder the Houthis have turned the Red Sea into their personal shooting range. However, what's more worrying is how fast the Houthis are improving their arsenal. Early on, the Houthis got their hands on Soviet-made P-21 and P-22s and Chinese C-801s, which have ranges of around 50 miles and 25 miles respectively. But since then, their inventory has improved, and they now deploy far more capable missiles. One of the latest additions is the Al-Mandab II, a copy of Iran's Ghadir, which has a range of up to 186 miles and can really pack a punch. These missiles are just part of the group's growing arsenal, and it's clear that the Houthis have been getting better and better at using them. By 2025, they've turned missile warfare into a full-blown strategy, proving that even a relatively small group can make waves, literally. Based on this, you might be thinking that the US has a pretty solid grasp on what the Houthis are working with. But that's just the thing. Knowing what weapons your opponent might have in their arsenal is one thing. Knowing how they're putting them together and how many they actually have is something else entirely. And that is where the Houthis continue to keep the US guessing. Despite 20 months of attacks, the US still doesn't have a clear picture of the full scope of the Houthi arsenal. And it's not just about tracking what they possess, it's about how they're getting their hands on it and maintaining a steady flow of weapons. What makes this even more perplexing is in the Houthis' ability to innovate and adapt their weaponry. They are constantly iterating, assembling systems in what seems to defy expectations. And even when their creations fail, they learn and improve, a concept the military calls failing forward. This blend of resourcefulness and persistence is undoubtedly another reason why the Houthis have been able to resist the US Navy for so long. Beyond simply arming themselves, the Houthis have shown an extraordinary talent for turning limitations into strengths. They can turn to innovative tactics and resourceful repurposing of existing materials to create new threats. For instance, once their missile systems were largely eliminated, they transformed smaller existing vessels into mighty weapons platforms, making the best of what they had. These improvised drone boats became a prime example of their ingenuity, making what was once a small patrol boat into a high-risk weapon of terror. Between November 2023 and July 2024, the Houthis launched a number of attacks using these unmanned surface vessels, or USVs for short, with great success. The attacks led to sinking of 2 vessels, the seizure of another, and the deaths of at least 3 seafarers. In some instances, the Houthis have outfitted these drone boats with decoys, dummies designed to resemble pirates. This psychological twist on their attacks doesn't just add to the chaos, it creates a level of uncertainty that makes it nearly impossible for targeted vessels to respond quickly or effectively. But the Houthis aren't just relying on confusion. Their attacks are also alarmingly precise. They have set up spotters at sea to guide the drone boats, tracking and remotely steering them right to their targets. The result is laser-accurate strikes that have raised serious concerns across the maritime community. But even if their ships aren't getting hit, their wallets certainly are. The Houthi attacks caused insurance premiums for vessels sailing through the Red Sea to skyrocket from 0.7% of the vessel's value to as much as 2%. But USVs weren't the only unmanned machines the Houthis have been using to give the US Navy a headache or two. There's also the other 3-letter troublemakers, UAVs, or unmanned aerial vehicles. Since 2016, the Houthis have steadily ramped up their drone game. The Qasef UAV, capable of carrying up to 66 pounds of explosives, became one of their primary tools. These drones are purpose-built for one thing: creating chaos. In February 2024, the MV Navis Fortuna, a US-owned bulk carrier, was struck by one of those Houthi drones. And while there were no injuries and the overall damage was minor, it was another sign that these drones were not to be underestimated, especially when the Houthis keep using and producing them. With assistance from Iran, the Houthis have established drone factories, improving their designs and capabilities over time. This allowed the group to develop an increasing variety of drones and loitering munitions. These efficient, low-cost, and highly effective weapons allow them to continue to challenge the US naval forces. And this challenge is certainly costing the US greatly. Ships like the USS Carney are firing SM-2 missiles, which cost around $2 million each, to defend against drones worth only $2,000, if that. That is a massive cost differential, 1,000 to 1. And let's not forget that the US Navy doesn't have an infinite supply of these advanced missiles, which can take years to build. But the Houthis rarely use just aerial drones or just missiles. They like to go for the full package, mixing and matching their arsenal in complex, multi-layered attacks that keep the US Navy constantly on its toes. Drones buzz overhead, missiles race toward a target, and then another surprise attack just when you think the coast is clear. That's exactly how the Houthis operate. They're using waves of strikes with different kinds of munitions, keeping their adversaries in a constant state of panic, forcing them to defend on multiple fronts. We've already mentioned the January 9, 2024 assault with drones, cruise missiles, and anti-ship missiles. This was certainly not an isolated case. Even earlier, on October 19, 2023, the USS Carney had to intercept 4 cruise missiles and 19 drones over a grueling 9-hour period. These were launched from Yemen, heading north along the Red Sea, potentially toward Israel. The Houthis' ability to launch such an array of attacks and sustain pressure over hours highlights their strategy. Keep hitting, keep tiring out the enemy, and always keep them guessing what's coming next. On September 27, 2024, the Pentagon reported another complex attack involving cruise missiles and UAVs aimed at US Navy warships in the Red Sea. Again, the Houthis launched their strike in waves, forcing the US Navy to defend against multiple types of weapons simultaneously. It's like playing a game of whack-a-mole, except the moles are incessant missiles and drones, and the stakes are a whole lot higher. Of course, the Houthis are playing this game on easy mode thanks to their geopolitical advantage. Holding control of strategic coastal areas along the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait gives them a powerful vantage point over one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. This allows them to monitor and target vessels with impressive precision, making it increasingly difficult for the U.S. Navy to operate freely in the area. So, is that how the Houthis have managed to survive the wrath of the U.S. Navy? By knowing the turf, getting a big helping hand, and relying on creativity and innovation? Well, yes, but also that's not the whole story. You see, the U.S. Navy and the Houthis are playing entirely different games. For the U.S., it's all about presence. The U.S. Navy's strategy is based on the assumption that a big show of force will make adversaries think twice. But for the Houthis, that's more like a challenge. They're not intimidated by the sight of U.S. warships, especially when they've already survived multiple rounds of U.S. airstrikes. In fact, they might actually welcome it. The Houthis have turned this into a kind of personal vendetta, a war of attrition they're determined to win no matter the cost. They're playing the long game with relentless attacks undeterred by the U.S. Navy's show of force. Plus, the U.S. Navy can't go all in because of Iran. The White House has long been tiptoeing around Iran, trying to keep tensions in check, especially with Iran enriching uranium up to 60% fissile purity and getting more involved in regional conflicts. Striking harder against the Houthis might provoke Iran, and that is something the U.S. has been very cautious about. The Houthis, on the other hand, have no such hesitation. To them, this isn't just a skirmish, it's an existential mission. They are deeply motivated by ideology. That whole "death to America" mantra isn't just a slogan for the Houthis. They see every attack as a step closer to their ultimate goal, and they relish the chance to go toe-to-toe with the world's most powerful military. But make no mistake, the U.S. is winning. While the Houthis certainly have put up a fight, sometimes catching the U.S. Navy off guard, the record in the Red Sea tells a different story. Time and time again, the list of incidents tends to start with U.S. Navy intercepted or U.S. Navy shot down and U.S. Navy destroyed. In other words, the Houthis might have made their mark, but the U.S. is still the one that gets the last word. Operation Rough Rider is going for a much broader set of targets in Yemen than ever before. It's targeting command centers, logistics hubs, and locations tied to senior Houthi drone experts. It's a reign of terror coming down from the skies. In March 2025 alone, the U.S. conducted a barrage of airstrikes in the Houthi-controlled parts of Yemen. April brought no signs of slowing down, with 25 airstrikes conducted by April 7th. It's clear the U.S. intends to make good on its promise to completely annihilate the Houthis. But this rebel force has shown resilience before. As CNN once put it, they have an extraordinarily high tolerance for pain. So the real question is, can they keep pushing back against a vastly superior military force? For the Houthis, this isn't just a strategic battle, it is a cause they're willing to fight for until the very end. Will the U.S. succeed, or will the Houthis be able to adapt to this new level of sustained military pressure? Let us know what you think below. Now go check out how F-18 Super Hornets destroyed Houthis pirates, or click on this video instead.